if you were to ask 10 different people, hey, what's a VR game you played in 2024 that you think everyone just slept on, you're probably going to get 10 different answers. Speaking to someone who played dozens of 2024 releases in VR, there's definitely some games that I feel like were overlooked because they're not one of the big four, being Batman, Behemoth, Metro, or Alien. So here are my top 10 VR hidden gems for 2024. I will say that my criteria for a game being considered overlooked is that it needed to have less than 1,000 ratings on its platforms. Number 10, By Grid Alone. This one is a Meta exclusive with just 28 ratings at the Meta store. I think the biggest problem this game suffered from is kind of like a bad piece of marketing. The developers, if you were looking at any of the marketing and the messaging they were putting out, basically said that they were heavily inspired by games like Dead Space and Cosmodread. So I kind of wrote this one off too because I was like, I'm not really in the mood for another horror game. Then when the game actually came out and I got a chance to play it, what I found wasn't a horror game, I found a bullet hell. Also, this game is sci-fi based, and I'm kind of burned out on these dystopian future games that VR always tends to do, where you're just walking through an empty environment and there's all this like dilapidated stuff like abandoned cars or subway rails and things like that. I grew up watching stuff like Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica and Babylon 5, and I grew up playing games that were more fantasy or sci-fi based like Zelda or Metroid, for instance. So I really liked this game for what it was, but I had to play it first because I think the marketing really kind of led you astray. Number 9, Exploding Kittens VR. I love this game, and it's really easy to write this off if you look at it as something that's made for kids because the graphics are pretty cartoony, but this is a game of chance and strategy. In Exploding Kittens, you and your opponents take turns drawing balls from a box. Now each ball will either have a tool you can use to either like steal objects from another player or take a sneak peek of what's coming up, or there are these different types of cats where if you put two together you can actually steal a random item from an opponent and they really can't stop it. The object is to be the last player standing after everyone else gets blown up with a kitten holding a bomb. It's a great change of pace if you're looking to play something in multiplayer that's not just a straight up shooter. It's fun with friends, it's family friendly, and it's great for new VR users. The game only has 119 ratings in the Meta store, and I think that's criminal. I think it's fun as hell. Give it a shot. Let me know what you think. By the way, for any of the games that are available on Meta, I will have affiliate links down below to get yourself a little discount if you want to check them out. Plus, you'll be helping to support the channel. Number 8, Escaping Wonderland. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into this one because I did do a full review of this game. You can check that out on the YouTube channel. I'll link it down below. But to summarize, this is a spiritual prequel to Down the Rabbit Hole from the same studio, and it puts you in the world of Alice in Wonderland. So if you're familiar with the story in that world, you're going to interact with some of the characters from that classic series, like Tweedledee Tweedledum and the Cheshire Cat. What surprised me about this one was how deep the story was. It's a surprisingly adult story about mental health. You'd think it'd be something lighthearted when you look at this, like, oh, okay, it's a cute little puzzle game, it's not going to get too deep. No, this is a very, very adult story, and as someone who has had mental health problems, this story in this game really spoke to me. This is a game you can play sitting down, so if you had limited mobility, it's a game that's perfectly fine for that. And there are all sorts of little hidden collectibles spread throughout these chapters, so if you're someone who likes to collect everything to 100% games, or if you want to know more about the lore of this world, you have that available for you too. The game currently has 174 ratings on the Meta store. It deserves way more than that. At number 7 is Augmented Empire, sticking with a game that kind of takes place directly in front of you in the diorama style world. Augmented Empire is a sci-fi turn-based RPG. There we go again. RPGs in VR that have full party systems tend to be lacking in VR. Really, this year we got 2, Augmented Empire and Triangle Strategy, but before that, you'd be hard pressed to find one outside of Demio. This game has a sci-fi edge with an amazing story, an incredible voice cast, because oh god, have I heard some diabolically awful voice acting in VR games this year. There's none of that here, and even though this is an update of an old Oculus Go game, the developers did take the time to upscale the textures. I think it's 2K textures on Quest 2 and 4K textures on Quest 3. The game just looks absolutely phenomenal. There's a whole leveling system and a skill tree for each character, the same that you will find in a proper RPG. And if you're someone who is longing for good RPG action in VR, if you play like Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and things like that, VR has probably been pretty lacking for you. This is one to definitely check out. It has 76 ratings on the Meta store. That's criminal. At number 6, you have Into Black. This one comes from one of the most underrated developers I think in VR. That's the Binary Mill. They previously made Resist, which is a very, very solid game that got one of the best Quest 3 updates you'll see on that headset. And they also made Gun Club VR and Rush, both again 2 really solid games. Into Black is another sci-fi adventure. You're probably picking up on a bit of a theme here, where you have crash landed on a planet and you need to repair your ship. Alongside you is a goofy robot who will help you deliver exposition and set up your next mission. Most of the game, at least in the early parts, involves you going cave diving to find materials to help repair your ship. When you come back to your ship, you can use those items to upgrade your weapons to be able to mine much better materials, and in the course of that, a whole science fiction story plays out that I'm not going to spoil here, but it's really good. This game is also playable in co-op, so it ticks that box for people who prefer to play in VR with their friends. And it's another good example of solid storytelling in VR, because I think storytelling in VR in general tends to be pretty lacking. This game also has a wonderful sense of humor. It doesn't really take itself too seriously, because some sci-fi can really take itself too seriously. If you're a fan of something like the Guardians of the Galaxy movies from Marvel, you'll kind of get that similar vibe here. Into Black is currently a Meta exclusive with 418 ratings in the Meta store. It wouldn't surprise me to see this one go to Steam, just like Resist eventually did, where it went to Steam about a year or so after it came out on the Quest. At number 5 is Brazen Blaze, a 3v3 melee combat game. I almost call this something more akin to like a hero shooter. This was a huge departure from developer My Dearest, because up until this point, they had been known for making VR visual novels like Tokyo Chronos, Altadeus, and Dyschronia Chronos Alternate, one of my favorite games of last year. But like I said, this one's a 3v3 brawler. You select from any number of heroes that have their own skill attributes and special attacks and things like that, and then you hop into an arena and you brawl until you're the last one standing. Now, I had a chance to play this game in early beta, and I got pretty worried when I saw that it was going to be a paid app, because I think games like this do better when they're going to be free to play and kind of go the live service route with in-game currency and microtransactions for things like skins. There are so many free-to-play PvP multiplayer games in VR already that any game that is charging is already going to be at a disadvantage, because people are going to say, why would I pay money to play that game when I can play this one over here for free? And a lot of free games are actually pretty high quality, for instance Population 1. So you end up with a whole lot of paid multiplayer games like Galaxy Card, like Exploding Kittens, like Brazen Blaze, like Mannequin, like Contractor Showdown, although that one actually started off pretty well, but the lobbies have since died down. So you shell out money for these games and you go into the lobbies and see that no one is really playing them. Brazen Blaze has 65 ratings on Steam and 330 on Quest. The last time I hopped into this game, I could not get a match at all, which was really sad to see. At number 4 is Grimlord. Now this is kind of cheating, because this game has been in early access for a really long time, but that kind of underscores my point here. The game has been in early access on Steam for I think about 2 years now, and despite that, it only has 700 ratings on Steam. Developers have now gone to the 1.0 full release of the game, which is basically the most complete version of it with new chapters, new boss fights, and things like that. And they've also added a Meta Quest port that has 194 ratings as I record this video. Now I do think Grimlord suffered from the fact that it did its full release in the same month that Skydance's Behemoth came out, and these two games are fairly similar in that they're fantasy-based melee combat action RPGs. So I kind of wish that Grimlord waited another month and released this month in January instead of in December, where it could escape Behemoth's shadow and have a chance to stand on its own. Because make no mistake about it, while I think Grimlord is a very solid game, I thought Behemoth was a much more polished game. But I'm not surprised by that, because look at the size of the two studios that made these games. Having said that, Grimlord has solid combat, some really fun boss fights, some NPCs with a little bit of like shaky voice acting, but in general they hold up pretty well. Full skill tree, tons of weapons to use, different armors, all the things you would want in a good fantasy action RPG. Grimlord does take its inspirations for something like Dark Souls, and I think it's really hard to mimic that kind of combat in VR, because frankly we're not tumbling to do dodges, that would make us all throw up. But the combat is pretty solid, the weapons have pretty good weight, and the game does pass my personal wiggle test, where I just wave this weapon back and forth and see if I can kill enemies. I tried that multiple times in this game and I actually got killed several times. I will say that as I record this video, I have only played Grimlord on PCVR. I have not had a chance to check out the Quest version. I will be doing that in the next week or so. Number 3 is Downtown Club. This one I understand, because of every game on the list, this is the only one that's still in early access. This is currently only available on Quest with 174 ratings at the time of this recording. And racing games in general are kind of lacking for VR, especially in standalone VR. This year alone we got 2, we got this one, and we got a game called Exo Cars. But before that, there was really just Grid Legends, and then there were a bunch of like kart racers and like tiny car racers like Mini Motor X and things like that. There are several city-based tracks available, and you can race them at 3 different times a day to give you a different look, and there's a small handful of cars, but more than anything, I just see potential in this game. So far, I really do like what I've played, and if you have a Behaptic suit, this game does have Behaptics compatibility. At number 2 is Silent Slayer: Vault of the Vampire, and I know that some people tend to stay away from horror games, especially jump scare horror games a la Five Nights at Freddy's, because they just don't like things jumping in their face like that. Totally understand that. But this game comes from Shell Games, the makers of the absolutely excellent I Expect You to Die series, and it's essentially, I called it Operation when I first saw it, But essentially what you're doing is you're solving puzzles to open the casket and then remove the restraints and finally put a stake in the heart of a bunch of different vampires. What I was surprised to find when I played this game, and I think shell games are the masters at doing this, is that even though you're not really moving around a whole lot, you're not interacting with a ton of characters, there is a fairly involved story that plays out here. And again, this is another game that has multiple endings. The game also does something I don't think enough VR games do, and that's ramp. The first couple of vampires that you kill are very easy, you have very basic tools, and then it layers more tools on top of that as you progress in the game. Each casket becomes more difficult to open, and each vampire becomes more difficult to kill, forcing you to master all the tools you have available to you or risk becoming that vampire's breakfast when they wake up. It's a heck of a lot of fun, it's pretty challenging, and it gets more challenging as you progress in the story. And again, this is from a very good studio, Shell Games. It only has 149 ratings on the Metastore and 22 on Steam. Again, like every other game on this list, that is way too low for a game of this quality. So do yourself a favor, you can use my affiliate code down below if you want to get the game on Quest or just catch it on sale. It's a solid title, check it out. And number 1 is Max Mustard. This one is from Toast Interactive, the makers of the very popular Richie's Plank experience. In a year where platformers seem to have a bit of a resurgence, with Astrobot on PS5 winning Game of the Year and Super Mario Wonder being like a massive hit on Nintendo Switch, I'm shocked that a game like this didn't do better in VR, especially when we found out that Astrobot was not going to get VR support. The game currently has 645 ratings on the Metastore, 370 on PSVR 2, and 27 on Steam. That Steam number is way too low. Really, all of these are too low for a game of this quality. Most gamers have played a platformer at some point in their lives, whether it was like the older ones like Mario or Sonic or Crash Bandicoot, or the more modern ones like Ratchet & Clank or Jackson Dexter or Astrobot. It's perfect for new users, so you can play it sitting down. It's not overly challenging to the point of getting into rage quit. It tells a fairly decent story for a platformer. Most platformers don't have super deep involved stories because that's not really the nature of that genre, but this one's pretty good. When in 2024, and I did a whole video about this, Max Mustard was 90% off on the store. It was the first game in a rash of Quest games that did 90% off sales to kind of boost attention and get more players into their games. And despite it being number 1 on the Quest store for I think almost 2 weeks, it still only has 645 ratings on the Metastore. That is just straight up a shame. It should not have happened. In my opinion, it's the most overlooked VR game in 2024, and if you haven't played Max Mustard yet, you need to fix that. That's my list of hidden gems for 2024. Again, if you want to pick up any of these games on Quest, I do have affiliate links down below. But whatever platform you game on, if you see any of these on sale, or if you just had them on your wish list, go ahead and grab them and give them a look. I think they'll be well worth your time. Thanks for watching. Catch you on the next one.